I spent my last 20 years as a Christian singing and celebrating the fact that I am saved. And I thought I knew what salvation was and how it worked. But after spending 4 years in my master's in theology and 2 years as a pastor, I can now say beyond a shadow of a doubt that I did not know what salvation really was and how it worked. And I'm convinced that most evangelicals don't really know either. So does this mean that most evangelicals are not saved? Does that mean that you are not really saved? Well, yes and no. Let me explain. Now, before I continue, one of the first things that we need to admit is that this whole topic of salvation is plagued with insider language, with words like justification, predestination, propitiation, propitiation? Is it propitiation? Propiciación? I don't even know it in Spanish. Propiciación. So what we need to do is start with the basics, with the most important things. Whenever we use the word salvation in our regular lives, this word is always attached to an event. And if there's an event, there has to be a story. And as you know, if there's a story, there are protagonists, like Shrek saving Fiona, Arnold saving John Connor, Dory saving Nemo, Rose saving Jack, Frodo saving Middle-earth, and God saving humanity. Then there's the what, a thing or an event that somebody or somebodies are being saved from, like Shrek saving Fiona from the tower and the dragon, Arnold saving John Connor from another Terminator, Rose saving Jack from freezing to death, Dory and Marlin saving Nemo from a gruesome death, and God saving humanity from? God saving humanity from? Did you say or think about a word or something related to the afterlife? Well. This is where things get actually very interesting, because here is where things start getting more complex and beautiful. This is not as straightforward as we were trained to automatically say. There are at least 2 more elements in the salvation piece that I quickly need to touch on. The saving for element, the goal or telos of any act of salvation. So for example, Shrek saving Fiona from the tower and the dragon so he can get his swamp back and Fiona can marry Lord Farquaad. Shrek is saving Fiona for that. Arnold is saving John Connor so he can be the leader of the resistance and together defeat the machines. And God is saving humanity so that if your mind went to some ethereal afterlife place, I wouldn't blame you. Now, here is where most Christians start to drift apart. Why did God save us? But let's continue with the final one before we tackle all these 4 elements. We cannot forget that in a salvation event, there's always a timeline, a when. When did the salvation happen? Like, when did Dory and Marlin really save Nemo? Was this one event or a series of events? When did Shrek save Fiona? Did Shrek save Fiona at the tower, along the way, when they got married? When did the salvation start and when did it end, if at all? So the question we have to pose right now is, when did God save humanity? Was it one event? Was it a series of events? When did God's salvation of humanity start and when did it end, if at all? The other important thing in the case of God's salvation is that we're talking about billions of people across 200,000 years of history. And this is only if we focus on us, Homo sapiens. If we add, for example, Neanderthals, we're talking about a span of 400,000 years of history. Did salvation start at the cross? Did salvation end in the cross? Is the cross at the middle of the salvation process? Okay, now let's jump to the 3 questions that we left unanswered. What did God save us from? What did God save us for? And when did God save us? Let's go. The answers are, unsurprisingly, not very straightforward, because we can attest in all of Scripture that God saved individuals and groups of peoples in many occasions all throughout the Scriptures. God's salvation in the Scripture is multifaceted, and it doesn't always look the same or function the same, and it doesn't always have the same purpose or the same outcome. For example, in Genesis, God saves Noah and his family from an environmental catastrophe using an ark in order to repopulate the earth. Salvation in this case is collective. It is not salvation from spiritual oppression. Salvation in this case is not put in spiritual terms. They are being saved to worship and to restart the process of creation. In Exodus, for example, God liberates or saves a minority group from an empire. God saves the people from violence, from political, social, and economic oppression. Again, in this example, salvation is collective. It is not salvation from spiritual oppression, and salvation is not put in spiritual terms. Salvation and liberation was needed in order to have a wholesome communion with God, a wholesome relationship between an oppressed group and God. In the Torah, we see salvation or liberation as political, social, and economic reform. Salvation looks like a transition from disorder to order, which back then would have been considered an act of creation or recreation. In the prophets, salvation is different. The issue here is their hearts. They need salvation from their stubborn and idolatrous hearts. When we get to the gospel, we see Jesus encompassing all of these facets of salvation and adding even more. Jesus says of himself, "The Spirit of the sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release from darkness for the prisoners." Ergo, Jesus' mission for salvation, his telos, his purpose. In the Gospels, we see different salvation events. We see it through healings and forgiveness of sins. We see Jesus saving entire families by resurrecting key members of their families. We see Jesus freeing people from demons. We see God's salvation process through his teaching, through the feeding of people, saying, "Neither do I condemn you. Go ahead and sin no more." We see salvific economic restoration. Salvation has come to this house, he tells Zacchaeus. We see the facets of his salvation and restoration and liberation when he says, "Let the kids come to me." So as we can see, it should be clear that salvation, in the Bible at least, is not all about the afterlife. Not even close. To proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives. Salvation had to do with economics, with physical afflictions, with being liberated from torment, with sustenance, and with love and acceptance here and now. So if we go back to the question, what did God save us from? Our evangelical knee-jerk reaction tends to be hell. From hell. From eternal damnation. From death. If you were like me, we were trained to repeat this somewhat unsatisfying and very lazy answer. But as you can see now, this should no longer be. And it has never been an adequate answer to the question, what did God save us from? Among the plethora of things that we need to readdress when it comes to salvation, there is one important thing. One thing that is part of all of our modern minds. And Dr. Jules Martinez is spot on here when he says that salvation is individual, but not individualistic. I respond individually, but in relation to and with millions of people in the world and the church throughout history. This is a globe-sized project involving groups, individuals, my neighbor, ethnicities. This is a group effort, almost a group response to God's initiative, to God's life, love, and revelation, to his work in and through us. It is salvation for me in the sense that I'm part of this global project involving every nation, every tongue, every color, every ethnicity, every language, every race. Reframing salvation is key to understanding how the Spirit moves in the world today. It is key to understanding God's mission in a more integral and cohesive way. And this directly informs the church's mission in the world to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives. This pushes us to have a more integral, cohesive, a holistic way of doing mission in the world, as opposed to spending millions and millions of dollars on groups that the whole purpose is to get people to repeat the sinner's prayer. If salvation is not just all about the afterlife, then you and I got more work to do. And more of what we do every day matters. The church is in the business of holistic salvation. That is how we align with God's purpose here on earth. Now, did you know that the YouTube algorithm knows you so well, but so well, that it knows that you will love this video? So let's trust the machine and go click here, and I'll see you over there. Peace.